Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 18066 in the name of Rachel Hamilton on congratulates Doddie Weir OBE and calls for automatic access to Blue Badge scheme for people with MND. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and therefore can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Rachel Hamilton to open the debate. Ms Hamilton, please.
Great pleasure to present this motion to Parliament today. I extend a warm welcome to the members of MND Scotland, if they have made it to the gallery, and my constituents Paul and Doreen Cheeseman, who are in the gallery. You may have noticed somebody else who's in the gallery today. He's quite hard to miss. Without his great courage and determination, the fight against motor neuron disease would not have gained so much vital support and awareness. Presiding officer and fellow members, please join me in welcoming Doddie Weir OBE and his wife Cathy. He began charging around like a mad giraffe back in the late 80s for Stu Mel and Melrose Rugby Football Club. A Borders lad, born and bred, he then went on to be selected for the Scotland team in 1990 with his first appearance against Argentina. Doddie is undoubtedly a rugby legend, racking up a whopping 61 caps during his successful rugby career, and I'm delighted he has pledged his support for my campaign. Doddie has been instrumental in raising awareness of MND, and his foundation, My Name's Doddie, has gone from strength to strength, raising funds for grant support. The foundation arose due to the lack of options given to MND sufferers, with no effective treatment and no access to meaningful clinical trials. Presiding officer, the reason why we are here today debating automatic access is due to the hard work of my constituents, the Cheesemans. Doreen Cheeseman, who lives with MND, first highlighted the issue to me, and after receiving their letter, it spurred me into action. Motor neuron disease is a rapidly progressing terminal illness which prevents signals from the brain to the muscles. People living with MND can deteriorate rapidly, losing their ability to walk easily or raise and lower their arms. Currently, there is no cure or effective treatment for MND, and the average life expectancy after diagnosis can be, sadly, just 18 months. Given the nature of MND and the time frame in which someone can become immobile, it is important that life is made as easy as possible for them. My campaign seeks to change the criteria for the Blue Badge scheme to allow people living with MND to gain automatic access. At the heart of the campaign is a fundamental aim to ensure that people with MND keep their independence for as long as possible. Having the ability to carry out their normal everyday lives as best as possible should be considered when it comes to mobility, especially driving. As a bit of background, currently the Blue Badge entitlement criteria does not include those living with MND. It is estimated that around 230,000 people in Scotland hold a Blue Badge, allowing them to park on roads without charge and normally without time limit. Around 75% of Blue Badge holders say they would go out less if they didn't have one. People are only eligible if they are in receipt of the higher rate of mobility component of the Disability Living Allowance, or those who score 8 or more on the moving around descriptor for the mobility component of Personal Independence Plan payment. Back in 2017, Scotland's Blue Badge scheme was extended to include carers and relatives of people with conditions such as dementia, autism and Down syndrome, but not for MND. Presiding officer, waiting times and application difficulties can all act as barriers to people with MND obtaining a Blue Badge under the current circumstances. As a person with MND cannot automatically access a Blue Badge, there is often a lengthy waiting time which is incompatible with the nature of which the disease causes immobility. Waiting time associated with the processing of Blue Badge applications varies, and currently it takes on average around 12 weeks. Feedback from MND Scotland advisors has highlighted that in some circumstances it can take up to 2 months. This is simply too long for someone with MND, given their mobility could significantly have deteriorated within that time frame. Moreover, for those without access to a computer, the paper documents for applying for Blue Badges are lengthy and time-consuming. MND Scotland notified me that it also varies from local authority to local authority. In Aberdeenshire, for example, the application form is 7 pages long, and in Glasgow, the form is 27 pages long. So hearing of Doreen's experience of a desk assessment carried out by an OT at the What Matters Hub perhaps was the most dignified way that Scottish Borders Council could offer since Transport Scotland had dispensed with the previous system of the GP certification system. I know, however, that this is not the case for everyone across Scotland, and therefore I believe there should be a simpler process. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I want to thank members from across the Chamber, from Labour, the SNP and Liberal Democrats, for their support for my motion. I believe it is the right action to give people with MND their independence for longer. I also want to thank the Scotsmen for their coverage and for backing my campaign, for MND Scotland for their continued support and with their assistance in preparation for today's debate. And finally, I must congratulate Doddie Weir on his remarkable achievements to date. The positivity and tenacity that Doddie has displayed throughout the years in exceptionally difficult circumstances is a formidable example to us all. And looking forward to the future, I hope that we can see action from the Scottish Government to make a simple change to the Blue Badge scheme criteria, a simple change that will make a huge difference to many people with MND right across Scotland, and remove a significant barrier which allows them to live their lives more freely and independently. The costs are insignificant. It's about dignity. Thank you, and please stay, everyone, for a photo in the garden lobby after the debate if you can. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. And as I always do, can I say gently to the public gallery that applause, though I perfectly understand why you're doing it, is not permitted in debates in Parliament. Just members may applaud. I now call Miles Briggs to be followed by Monica Lennon. Mr Briggs, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by congratulating my friend and colleague Rachel Hamilton on securing today's debate and pay tribute to her campaigning on this important issue. And I too would like to welcome to the gallery today Doddie Weir and his family and warmly congratulate him on receiving the OBE and commend him for all his campaigning work, which is truly inspirational and which I know will make a huge difference to people with MND in the future. I'd also want to take this opportunity to remember my friend, the late Gordon Aikman, whose campaigning a few years ago achieved so much in raising public awareness across Scotland of MND. Gordon's legacy lives on today in many, many ways, not least in the improved provision of MND specialist nurses across the country and in the Gordon Aikman Scholarship. And I want to express my condolences to the family and friends of Fernando Rickson, who died recently and who showed such dignity and determination in his struggle with MND. Again, we've seen the significant amount of money for research into MND that Fernando and his supporters and the Rangers supporters family have raised. And that offers more hope for a cure in the future, which is something we all clearly want to see and continue to want to see prioritised to help achieve. Now, I fully support the call for those diagnosed with MND, which we know can be such a rapidly progressing condition, to be given automatic access to a blue badge without going through the bureaucratic and potentially lengthy application process. As Doddie Weir had said, not everyone with MND has 6 months to wait for their blue badge system to kick in, and I believe everyone who is diagnosed with motor neuron disease should automatically be entitled to a blue badge. This will enable families to live in dignified and a full life as possible while coping with this terrible disease. People diagnosed with MND obviously feel the loss of their independence and their mobility, and providing them with a blue badge has the potential to help significantly by providing them with easier parking and greater accessibility. In recent months, we've seen progress, for example, in supporting the definition of terminal illness, which included those in the last 2 years of life, which was included in the new Social Security Scotland Bill. It was a welcome step forward to see in April of this year the extension of free personal care for people under 65 in Scotland to deliver progress for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. But there is much more we can do to improve their lives and support those and help provide their loved ones and carers with that support as well. So I believe the Scottish Government should be able to implement this change to an automatic blue badge for everyone diagnosed with MND, and to make that extension without any real delay. And I hope today's debate can demonstrate to ministers the broad and genuine cross-party support that exists for such a move in Scotland. It is a common-sense, practical measure which can make a real difference. And I urge ministers today to set out in their response to the debate today how the Scottish Government can help take this forward. We all want to make people's lives easier, and I hope across party we can make that happen today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Briggs. And I call Monica Lennon to be followed by Annabelle Ewing. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Rachel Hamilton for bringing this debate to the Chamber today and for kicking it off with such clarity of purpose and compassion. I think all of us know that MND is a debilitating and devastating illness which has such a sudden impact on those who are diagnosed with it and their families. I've spoken previously in Parliament about the experience of one of my constituents, Frank Lyons, who lived in Hamilton and who very sadly passed away in July 2017 after his diagnosis of MND in 2014. Frank received excellent care at the hands of the amazing staff and volunteers at Kilbride Hospice in East Kilbride, and he fundraised a lot, and his family continue to do so. So they are very much in my thoughts today. And there has been lots of commendable work to raise awareness of MND in recent years, and not least due to the work of the late Gordon Aikman, whose efforts have led to widespread increase in our understanding of MND and what is required to help those who are diagnosed with it. And alongside colleagues, I am also pleased to welcome Rachel Hamilton's constituents, the Cheesemans, to the Chamber today, and of course to take the opportunity to congratulate Doddie Weir on his OBE and for his efforts in furthering MND research, and to welcome his wife Cathy here today. I've had the pleasure of hearing Doddie speak at an event, and I think to say that he's a legend who is courageous and funny and brave and a role model is probably an understatement. But it's a real pleasure to have Doddie and Cathy here today. There are champions in this Parliament of the cause of MND. Kes Dugdale, who's no longer a member in this Parliament, who was a very close personal friend of Gordon Aikman, did so much, and I think it's right to give her a mention today. But I'm also really pleased, although we're often on opposite sides, Christina McKelvey, the Minister for Older People and Equalities, who has been, again, very courageous and persistent in sharing her family's experience of losing her dad to MND. And I think when I sit here, I'm very acutely aware that MND doesn't pick sides. So whether it's football clubs or political affiliations, any one of us can be affected by MND and those that we love. But getting to the campaign, I mean, this really is simple. You know, do we even need to debate it? But here we are. So the campaign to change the criteria for the Blue Badge scheme is to ensure that people with MND are given automatic access rather than have to go through a lengthy process of assessment. It's hard to see how anyone could disagree. We know that people with MND don't have time on their side. And we know that applying for a blue badge is not straightforward for anyone. I was doing some research, and in some local authorities, it's almost 30 pages if you're doing a paper application. So for those with MND, their time is precious and they can't afford to waste it. So I'm pleased to back this campaign. I commend Rachel Hamilton for all her efforts, and also pay tribute to the Scotsman for taking this issue forward and keeping it in the public eye. I do look forward to hearing from the Minister in his closing remarks, and I hope it is something that we can start to work towards addressing as quickly as possible. I know that probably Christina McKelvey is in the Minister's ear already, so I remain very optimistic. People with MND, and of course those with other terminal and life-shortening conditions, need access to a blue badge, as a matter of urgency. So let's get on and deliver that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Lennon. And I call Annabelle Ewing, followed by Brian Whittle. Ms Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to have been called to speak in this debate, and I too would like to congratulate Rachel Hamilton on securing this members' debate today. And at the outset, I also would wish to welcome Doddie Weir and his wife to the gallery, and I would wish to commend Doddie Weir for all that he has done for Scottish rugby and to celebrate his 61 caps for his country in the Scottish national rugby team. And I would also wish to take this opportunity to express my admiration for what Doddie Weir has achieved through his foundation to raise awareness of motor neuron disease and to raise funding for research and to support those suffering from MND. MND is a very cruel illness indeed. And I know that many families in Scotland and indeed many members of this Parliament have had to watch a loved one suffer so badly. My family has sadly not been immune from this, presiding officer. And of course this week our hearts do go out to the family and friends of Fernando Rickson, whose bravery and dignity in facing his MND diagnosis were truly inspirational. May he rest in peace, presiding officer. The key issue for discussion today is whether to extend the automaticity of the Blue Badge scheme to those diagnosed with MND. That is to say, are there grounds for considering that MND is unique in terms of its nature, such that the normal assessment rules of the Blue Badge scheme should not apply? In this regard, I am aware that to date, the eligibility criteria are, as a general rule, not focused on whether an individual has a particular kind of medical condition. Rather, the criteria at this time are focused on an assessment of the impact of that condition on a person's mobility. That is to say, a universal approach is taken rather than a focus on specific conditions. Whilst I understand, presiding officer, the rationale for such an approach, both in terms of fairness and in terms of administrative simplification, although I think we need to look at the length of some of these forms, the question must be asked as to whether such an approach, given what we now know as regards MND, is in fact equitable. Specifically, we know that MND is a terminal illness. We know too that a third of people diagnosed with MND die within the first year. We also hear of the lengthy periods, and we've heard that today, involved for assessment for a blue badge of those individuals who do not fall within the current automaticity regime, with many months indeed being cited in terms of individual experiences with the process. This then begs the question as to how this process meets the demonstrable needs of those suffering from MND who have very little time. A wait for such individuals of, say, 3 months to get a blue badge, when they may only have a year to live, is depriving them of a quality of life in their last days on what could be viewed, presiding officer, as bureaucratic grounds. In fact, it is important to note that the Scottish Government has already in the area of social security legislation recognised the need to remove administrative hurdles to ensure that resources can be accessed by those with a terminal illness. At the same time, the Scottish Government has also sought to address how quickly and effectively those with MND receive the care and support that they need, and this is all very much to be welcomed. With this commendable track record, I would now urge the Scottish Government to proceed to review the Blue Badge automaticity rules with a view to including those who have been diagnosed with MND. This could be done in tandem with the Scottish Government's ongoing work to complete its first ever National Action Plan on Neurological Conditions, which I understand is to be published by the end of this year. This action plan will set out how people with neurological conditions and their carers are involved in decisions about care and support. It will also set out how the provision of coordinated health and social care will be improved and how a sustainable neurological workforce for the future will be developed. Presiding officer, this excellent initiative would seem to me to afford a very timely opportunity to work across government portfolios to ensure that the very important practical issue of equitable access to the Blue Badge scheme for those diagnosed with MND is now addressed. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Ewing. And I call Brian Whittle, will be followed by Finley Carson. Mr Carson will be the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Whittle, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I would like to add my congratulations to my colleague Rachel Hamilton for bringing this debate to the Chamber. To be honest, the first time I really became aware of MND was through Gordon Aikman, and I never knew Gordon Aikman, but I've been in rooms with Gordon Aikman when he was speaking, and the way that I've said this before, that the room was drawn to him, I think would suggest what a remarkable individual that gentleman was. And that baton has been passed over, and it's great to welcome the indomitable, the indefatigable, the inimitable, the inflatable Doddie Weir to the chamber. And I often think when I see Doddie in his quiet suits that he usually wears, that there must be rows of deck chairs without covers somewhere. I think we all recognise that in so many ways he is larger than life. He's never backward coming forward, and I'm always reminded of the time, and I'm going to tell the story, Doddie, I'm sorry, when we were golfing at Crammie's Golf Day down at Slaley Hall. He does, I mean, the size of him, he plays golf like a giraffe going for a drink, but I don't know if he remembers, there's a really intellectual conversation, a heated intellectual conversation in the bar at Slaley Hall at 2 o'clock in the morning with some of our English counterparts, where Doddie was convinced, trying to convince the ensemble that Scotland are far better at scrummaging than England. And to prove this, he recruited me as a prop. So him and I were props, and only he could get away with this. He looked across at Eve Muirhead in her short skirt and high heels and said, "You'll do as a hooker." Now, I have to say that he was proved right, that unlikely front row won out the day. Now, his personality certainly comes to the fore if you look at him in his playing days. And I hold, obviously, in such a high regard his international sports career. And that pales into insignificance when considering the journey he finds himself on now and the way in which he has taken on that challenge head on. The money we have heard that he's raised in his campaign, the raising of awareness across the world of the MND condition, I think is quite remarkable. And that brings us to the motion today, this idea of the automatic blue badge for all MND sufferers. And it was Gordon Aikman that I remember describing the fact that when the lack of understanding of MND, when he was walking down the street, stumbling sometimes, not quite able to control his movements, people just thought he was under the influence of something. I think that obviously the work that Gordon Aikman is doing and the work that Doddie Weir is doing is going such a huge way to dispel those kind of thoughts. But it seems to me, as has been very eloquently put today in the chamber, that this is a shooty in, for want of a better expression. That it's obvious to me that this condition, this life-shortening condition, and can be as little as a year, it's obvious to me that given the repercussions of the contraction of MND, that an automatic blue badge is an obvious step forward. So, as always, Deputy Presiding Officer, it's great to see the big man doing his thing as he does, and of course, my admiration for everything he has achieved goes without saying. I wish him well in his continuing journey, and of course, with others, will continue to support his drive to find a cure for MND. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I call Finley Carson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I too thank Rachel Hamilton for bringing this debate to the Chamber today. I'm delighted that this motion allows us as parliamentarians to congratulate Doddie Weir on receiving his OBE from the Queen in recognition for his services to motor neurone disease research. And I gather from the contributions from other members in the Chamber, he must have played a bit of rugby too. Like my colleagues, I've watched in admiration as Doddie fights his horrible disease with his legendary wit, spirit and courage. Indeed, I would salute him, but I won't, because I'm too scared to. Because I know from the past that any sort of gesticulation has a result that has a deep impact on my wallet. Doddie, often with his partner in crime, Scott Hastings, they're masterful at taking movements as bids. And as Brian Whittle and I know to our cost, last year ended up somehow buying tickets for the Scottish Golf Open and a Loch Lomond booze cruise, which we later discovered didn't even include booze. And that was all whilst we just tried to summons the waiter. But you can imagine how difficult it was the next morning when my partner said, "I can't believe you bought that golf lot at the auction last night. And thank goodness you didn't buy the booze cruise." But Doddie, one of the most recognisable sportsmen of our generation, not only because of his dress sense, revealed in June 2017 that he was suffering from motor neuron disease. And from the very outset, he's been driven to help fellow sufferers and seek ways to further research into this as yet incurable disease. He established the My Name's Doddie Foundation in response to his frustration at the lack of options given to MND sufferers. He's reached out to leading neurologists, professors and medical researchers and invited them to take part in an advisory panel engaging with research community to seek their advice and to help us better understand MND and the work towards finding a cure. When high-profile names get the terrible news they have been diagnosed with something like MND, publicity is inevitably much greater, but that brings positives as well as negatives. And only yesterday, as we've heard, we witnessed the outpouring of love and respect for Fernando Rickson after his brave 6 years fight with the disease. And the constant media spotlight on him and his wife and young daughter must have been very difficult at times. However, Rickson helped raise more than £1 million to help scientists find a cure for the disease, with Doddie being among the first to pay tribute to him last week. We're aware of the high-profile campaigners, but we know that there are many suffering in silence and isolation, and those are the ones that I know Doddie is fighting for, including in my region where the numbers are stark. It's not yet known why Dumfries and Galloway has higher than average diagnosis for conditions like MS, MA and MND, but we know they have a profound impact on people's ways of life. And I would like to pay tribute to the former SNP MP Richard Arkless for all the work he's done in the subject, especially after the tragedy of losing his mother to the disease. Indeed, Richard discovered that in 2016 that 15 people per 100,000 in Dumfries and Galloway are diagnosed with the condition, against a UK-wide average of 6 in 100,000. And in Stranraer, my constituency, the statistics are sadly even bleaker, where the stats suggest that a staggering equivalent of 57 people per 100,000 are diagnosed. Dumfries and Galloway is a region where MND continues to have a devastating impact on so many lives, and it's vital today's debate raises awareness. It's admirable that Dumfries and Galloway Council do not charge for the Blue Badge scheme as a whole, but like other authorities, there is not an automatic assumption that those living with MND be granted a badge. Those living with MND should not have to face the red tape and daunting process of form filling and assessments, which is why I hope today's debate and calls already made by Rachel Hamilton and Doddie will allow for a change in policy and attitude to give MND sufferers as much independence as possible. I'm proud that this debate has taken place today, and I believe we have heard many emotive and powerful speeches in relation to MND. I sincerely hope that the Scottish Government, working alongside local authorities, will see the introduction of a policy to extend automatic access treatment as a matter of urgency. Presiding Officer, that would be a fitting legacy for all those living with MND. In closing, I would like to finish with no more fitting words than from the big man himself, and I quote, "My attitude is that you should do what you can today and worry about tomorrow when it comes. This is the card I've been dealt, so I've just got to get on with it." Mr. Weir, we do salute you.
I now call on Paul Wheelhouse to close the Government. Minister, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks also to all the members who contributed to this most important debate today. The range of views from across the Chamber highlight the emotive nature and indeed very significant impact that the Blue Badge scheme can have for those who get a Blue Badge. I'd also like to welcome Mr and Mrs Cheeseman, who I understand from Rachel Hamilton are here today. And I'd like to thank Rachel Hamilton for bringing this members' business debate forward. And I'd like to say that I'm personally delighted for Doddie and Kath to be here today to hear great tributes to Doddie himself as a great man, but also to respect the process that he's been going through, a very tough situation, but with great dignity and great enthusiasm and wit, I think, throughout. And I could spend probably hours telling you some of the stories about Doddie at school, where we were in the same year at school. I did have the honour of playing in a team less grand than Scotland with Doddie and seeing his firsthand his extraordinary skills in the line-out, and I think it probably stems from the fact he was already a foot taller than our primary 6 teacher when he arrived in primary 6, which is shown in the school photographs, which I'm sure Doddie still has a copy of. But I want to also pay tribute. I mean, Doddie is a great man, as I say, and a great leader in many ways, and I think he gave us an inspirational speech. I think Rachel Hamilton was there to hear it at the Borders College graduation, where Doddie was made a fellow of the college, and I think it was an inspiration to everyone who heard that speech that day. And I know he made it on the cuff as well, all the more impressive that he was deciding what he was speaking as we were waiting to go into the hall. So I think tremendous tribute to him as a person. But my colleagues across the chamber, I know this matter is of great personal interest, and indeed no more so than to my colleague Christina McKelvey, who I'm delighted has shared this debate with me here today in the chamber. I appreciate very much the issues that lie behind the request in the motion today, and I'd like to begin by explaining the situation just now, and hopefully we'll get to a good place by the end of the speech, so bear with me. I have to go through the motions, Presiding Officer. The Blue Badge scheme originated in the 1970s, and there have always been 2 types of eligibility criteria. The first is automatic, based on passporting from disability benefits, and the second is for individuals who don't qualify on this basis. An application can be made to the relevant local authority, who will decide if they meet specified eligibility criteria, as we've been hearing from Annabelle Ewing and others. The criteria are set by the Scottish Government in legislation. They have never been based on the medical conditions people have been diagnosed with. That's a correct point that's been made. This is consistent with practice across the UK. But instead, the eligibility criteria look at the impact of medical conditions on someone's mobility. This means that in Scotland, an adult is eligible for a blue badge if the local authority considers that they are unable to walk, or virtually unable to walk, or have a mental condition, meaning they pose a risk to themselves or others when making journeys. I understand from health colleagues that 160 people are diagnosed with MND each year in Scotland, and there are just over 460 people living with the condition at any one time in Scotland. So we obviously need to do all we can to help people manage this most cruel and debilitating of diseases. And I understand from Social Security colleagues that there are currently 226 people in Scotland who are in receipt of disability benefits, and where MND is the main condition, with the required mobility rate to passport them into the Blue Badge scheme. So that is helpful, that is progress perhaps. And I hope those automatically entitled are indeed already utilising that benefit. But if they're not, I hope this debate today that Rachel Hamilton has brought to the Chamber will raise awareness of the existing rules that they can take advantage of at present. Now, I want to highlight we have a record of listening to calls for legislative change, such as when we responded to concerns from parents and carers of disabled children by explicitly extending eligibility to those who might be at risk in traffic, for example, those with autism and other conditions. And this was in addition to, for example, our changes to protect badge holders moving into personal independence payment from disability allowance. And these mean that Scotland has, we believe, the best set of transitional protections in the UK in that respect. But in this instance, before I go on to discuss the specific call for change, we think the approach we have now in general terms is the right one, because firstly, not everyone who has a particular diagnosed medical condition needs parking concessions at the point of diagnosis. Secondly, having eligibility criteria that aren't focused on functional ability but on conditions would be unwieldy and perhaps add significant complexity to the system, though I do note colleagues have quite rightly raised the variability of the complexity of the application process that we're going to talk about shortly. Thirdly, issuing blue badges on a needs-based system of eligibility criteria ensures fair allocation of blue badges, and the current Scottish ratio of badge holders to parking spaces is around 1 to 9, where it's 1 to 30 across Great Britain. So there is more access to spaces, which obviously managing that process means that we're making sure that those who do need a blue badge can actually use the spaces when they need to use them in public. But I want to talk about how we're listening for the case for change now. While we have perhaps not been convinced a change in legislation is the way forward in this issue, I do agree very strongly there is always a need to ensure the scheme continues to improve. And members are right that speed and quality of decision-making is important, very important, in fact, as we've heard, for the very short periods that sometimes people have between a diagnosis and needing a blue badge. We need to obviously move fast, and Rachel Hamilton has set a number of those out, so I'll not repeat them. But I want to reassure Doddie and Mr and Mrs Cheeseman and other campaigners and colleagues across the Chamber that Transport Scotland have already been taking steps on these issues in partnership with Scottish local authorities and the other UK transport departments. For example, earlier this year, a new Blue Badge digital service was introduced, providing a better online application form for users, and we believe user satisfaction with this UK-wide service stands at 74% for August. Now, as I mentioned, this improvement work is done in partnership with local authorities. As we know, the Blue Badge scheme is run on a day-to-day basis by local authorities, and that is important because we have no powers in legislation to intervene in how local authorities administer the scheme operationally, including on specific cases. But I will come on to how we might be able to make a change without need for legislation. These are ultimately local decisions. However, Transport Scotland publishes guidance to local authorities about how they administer the scheme in a non-statutory code of practice. And this acts as a benchmark across Scotland against which local practices can be judged. The code currently says that local authorities should fast-track cases where someone is terminally ill, and as we all too horribly know, that is particularly relevant in the context of today's debate. And as Rachel Hamilton has set out, there is currently, sadly, as Doddie has made this point himself, tragically no known cure for MND, and I know that Doddie is indeed dedicating much of the funding that he is raising through his charity to trying to find a cure for this horrible disease. However, the code hasn't been updated since 2014, and we're conscious of society's needs and user expectations having moved on significantly since then. Therefore, I can confirm today that we will indeed revise and refresh the statutory code of practice in partnership with key organisations such as Motor Neuron Disease Scotland. I want to point out that this will also enable us to perhaps incorporate an accelerated model, as has been called for by members across the chamber, along the lines of perhaps a prescription type approach. For progressive conditions like MND, without changing legislation, we can commit to this today. So this means that MND care team perhaps could automatically authorise a blue badge. So I hope that is helpful. We obviously have much work to do to make that happen, but this will of course take into account the points raised in debate here today and look into what guidance can be given on the speed and quality of assessment decisions. And I want to reassure members that on behalf of Mr Matheson, who sadly can't be in the debate today, that I have been noting down the key points you have all raised, and members can expect that new code will underline the importance of things like local authorities making use of existing information sources, exercising professional judgment to assess applications, instead of unnecessarily calling people in for assessments. But as I say, there's potential for us to work together to try and have a more automated process indeed. And crucially, we'll also, in revising the code, support a person-centred approach to the scheme. And I think it's very important that issuing or refusing a blue badge isn't seen as an end in itself. Instead, the time and trouble someone takes to apply a very tough time in their life should result in the local authority considering what extra help they could offer to the user to make more journeys, to maximise the value of the blue badge to them, and make sure they have the best quality of life they can manage. And this kind of approach to delivering the service places the disabled person at the centre and is consistent with how we in Scotland want to see our public services being delivered. So I think looking at the scheme in that way shows the kind of improvements we can make, Presiding Officer, and will reflect the spirit of the motion that we've seen today. So we are in agreement about the objective. The method hopefully will be one that can deliver that. I'm grateful to members for participating in this important debate. Very grateful for Doddie and Kath, and indeed Mr and Mrs Cheemsman for coming here today. And I'm grateful to members for participating in the debate. And indeed thank Rachel Hamilton again for raising the subject. And hopefully we can, as I say, make sure we are all doing Doddie and Mr and Mrs Cheemsman proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament till 2:30.